3 stories about people who have died and then come back to life. These are known as near-death experiences. I think they're just death experiences, but they're called near-death experiences, NDEs for short. And I found some unusual ones that I think are interesting. 2 of them because they contain details that I haven't heard in any other NDE experiences. And the 3rd one is unusual in that the person who died didn't come back. Welcome to the Woo There It Is podcast. The first one is about Vinny Tolman. He was a 25-year-old construction worker and a filmmaker, and he was doing pretty well in the world. He felt pretty proud of himself, and he and his buddy decided to try this supplement that they had ordered from Thailand, and unfortunately, they took about 10 times as much as they should have because they didn't understand the dosing. So both of them got very, very sick. They decided to go get something to eat. Vinny decided, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. And he walked into the bathroom, turned around, locked the door, and then took a couple steps and then just fell back dead. And as soon as he died, there was this entity that was in the bathroom with him. I'll talk more about what this entity was in a second, but it was able to sort of see everything that was going on with Vinny, but it was also able to sense everything that was going on in the restaurant. It could sense the annoyance of the person who was trying to get into the bathroom after him. And it could sense the concern from the restaurant manager who was being asked to open the door because somebody had been in the bathroom way too long. And finally, the restaurant manager was able to open the locked door, and they immediately called 911. The paramedics showed up, started working on Vinny, but he was clearly dead. His body was cold to the touch. None of the CPR they did made any difference. So they zipped him up and they put him in the back of the ambulance and drove away. And this should have been the end of Vinny Tolman's life, but the first of 2 extraordinary events was about to happen. So like I said, there was this entity and it followed Vinny's body from the bathroom to the ambulance. Vinny's body was there, and with him was this rookie paramedic who was just kind of sitting in the back of the ambulance. And then there were 2 more seasoned paramedics driving in the front. The entity was just watching the paramedic, and he could see this interesting sort of glow around the paramedic's heart. And the entity was just kind of looking at it and finding it sort of mesmerizing. And that's when the entity felt this sort of whoosh come from behind him, from somewhere behind him, go past the entity and straight to the paramedic's heart. And as soon as it did that, as soon as it hit the paramedic heard this voice say,
"This one's not dead."
And the entity was watching all of this, and he knew that the paramedic had heard the same voice the entity heard because he saw the paramedic go look around him like, who just said that? And he saw the paramedic just kind of wonder what to do and just decide, well, it must have just been my imagination. And so then the entity kept watching, and once again, that same glow, except this time it was an even more strong glow, it was even brighter, coming from around the paramedic's heart. And once again, this whoosh came from behind the entity and hit the paramedic right in the heart. It said even louder this time,
"This one's not dead."
So now the paramedic knows something's up. He unzips the bag and he starts feeling around Vinny Tolman's body, trying to find a pulse somewhere, but he can't find a pulse anywhere. This guy's dead. He happens to touch Vinny's sternum, or his chest bone, and right when he touches it, he feels this jolt of electricity. Now that's not normal, but that's all he needs to know, I'm gonna resuscitate this guy. And so he starts all of the procedure of bringing Vinny Tolman back to life. He gets the shock panels to charge up and he puts them on Vinny's chest, shocks him, and nothing happens. And by this time, the guys in the front are like, hey, dude, what's going on? What are you doing? And they are really mad because basically this guy is messing with a dead body. They basically told him, you're going to get fired. But the rookie paramedic wouldn't stop. He goes again. He charges up the paddles, puts them on Vinny's body, shocks him, and nothing. He's dead. This guy's dead. Finally, he does it one more time. They charge up, he shocks Vinny's body, and there is a pulse. A very faint pulse, but a pulse. And they just happen to be right next to an emergency room. So they roll him into the hospital. Vinny starts flailing all around. So he's having some sort of reaction. They strap down his right arm and then they strap down his left arm. And it's right when they strap down his left arm that the entity that was following Vinny's body around felt its left arm being strapped down. And only then did this entity realize that it was Vinny. So Vinny had come out of his body and was basically following himself around, but didn't even know it. He didn't know who Vinny was. He didn't even identify with him. And he describes feeling really stupid about this, which I think is hilarious, to feel like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I didn't know that's my body. Well, you know, it's a pretty unusual circumstance, so I wouldn't feel too bad. But that's when he realizes that's him. So while Vinny is lying there, almost lifeless on the hospital bed, he feels this presence come to him. And the presence is full of so much peace and just the most warm, radiating feeling coming from it. And the presence says to him, Vinny, do you want to come with me or do you want to stay here? And Vinny's like, I definitely want to go with you. And so he goes off with this presence. And this entity would introduce itself to Vinny as Drake. That was his name, not the famous Canadian rapper. He essentially would say, I'm your guide. I'm your sort of spirit guide. Here's what's unusual about this near-death experience. Vinny chose to die, so he should have stayed dead. I've never known a near-death experience where when you're given the choice to go or stay, and you decide to stay in heaven, that you then don't get your wish granted. So he should have stayed dead, but something happens which makes him not dead. So that's what makes this unusual. Drake takes Vinny on this sort of tour of heavens, and he has this amazing experience. And at the end of all of it, Drake tells Vinny these 10 rules for life. Drake tells him to be authentic. He says the most authentic people in the world are the very young and the very old. And that's because they're the only ones who don't care what other people think. Lesson number 2, understand that the reason that we are here is to learn and be rich and have a better car than your friends. Just kidding, just to learn. Number 3, love everyone. Good luck with that. Number 4, listen to your inner voice. Number 5, use technology responsibly. If we are so distracted by tech, then we cannot recognize that inner voice. Crap. I'm still guilty of this. Number 6, release prejudice. Number 7, exercise the power of creation. Control your thoughts. And number 8, avoid negative influences. That's interesting because after I did ayahuasca, I had a much harder time watching shows like Game of Thrones. Even though Game of Thrones is so good, but then there's also like this sort of negative aspect of it that I just like couldn't handle anymore. So maybe that's me avoiding a negative influence. I don't know. Number 9, there is a purpose to evil. And number 10, know that we are all one. So those are the 10 rules for life. Vinny is just kind of floating there in the afterlife with Drake, just feeling great. And that's when Drake says to Vinny, Vinny, this is going to be very hard, but it's going to be worth it. And Vinny doesn't know what he's talking about, but Drake kind of pulls Vinny in for a hug. And Vinny says that when they hugged, it's just a very different experience from in the afterlife. And he said it was 4 times as powerful as just, a normal hug. And Vinny said right at that time, when Drake was giving him that hug, Vinny's brother was at his bedside and just praying for him to come back. And essentially, Vinny was going to come back to answer his brother's prayer, which is kind of bizarre when you think about it, because Vinny definitely would have been dead if the paramedic had not decided to work on his body. But that happened way before Vinny's brother gave the prayer. It kind of lends credence to this idea that time is not linear. I just had to bring that up as an interesting little detail. What Drake said was true. It was very hard for Vinny. So the next 3 months, he'd basically been in paradise. And I know people who've had really amazing ayahuasca experiences, and they have a really hard time coming back to normal life after that, because they've just been in heaven and they don't want to be back on earth. But he said after 3 months, he met the love of his life, and it has been worth it. And now he goes around talking about his near-death experience and trying to help people. And that is the story of Vinny Tolman. Hospice nurse Julie wasn't really sure if she even believed in an afterlife. Then she had a patient, and I'm going to call him Oliver, possibly because that's his name. I can't remember if she kept it anonymous. But she had this patient, and he had essentially been a recluse, a bit of a shut-in, and maybe even a bit of a hoarder. And he'd been very closed off. Like, he didn't really let a lot of people in until he was dying. And he was in his 50s, so in my opinion, very young to be dying. And this kind of went on for longer than it should have. He was supposed to die pretty quickly, but he ended up being alive for almost a year. And while he was going through the process, the nurses would come in, they would kind of help clear things out of his house, and he opened up to them more than he'd opened up to anybody in his life. And during that time, hospice nurse Julie got to know him pretty well. And they had a lot of discussions about the afterlife, about life in general, and they'd had a lot of philosophical, existential discussions. So then came the day when it was clear that Oliver was going to die. And Julie knew all of the signs because she's a hospice nurse, so she'd seen people go through this before. And her shift was over, so she sort of said a little prayer to him to say goodbye, and she left. As soon as she got into her car, she felt this wave of euphoria, of excitement, of joy, just hit her from nowhere. And she heard Oliver's voice in her head say, "Oh my gosh, Julie, if only I'd known. If only I'd known." And she could tell he was overjoyed. He was so happy. She was just bawling, just sitting there in her car, bawling with tears of joy. And she knew kind of intuitively what he meant. If only I'd known how good it is. If only I'd known how good it is. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he wouldn't have lived his life with as much fear. I'm not sure. But she knew that he was overjoyed now. As soon as this sort of wave of euphoria finally subsided, she looked down at her phone, and the nurse had texted her to tell her that Oliver had passed. And so that's kind of like a near-death experience, except hospice nurse Julie is the one to report it, and Oliver was the one to die. So again, a very unusual NDE. So I kind of cheated. That's not really an NDE, but we're gonna keep it. Jim Bruton was kind of a well-known war correspondent. So he literally went to places of war for a job, and that's not how he died. Instead, here's how he died. He decided to build his own plane. This guy is too smart for his own good. So he built his own plane, and then he took it for a spin, or whatever you call it when you fly your own plane. And while he's up in the air, the engine just stopped. So war didn't kill him, but his hobby did. After his plane crashed, Jim Bruton was transported to this sort of barren wasteland. And essentially what it looked like was if the largest city in the world had been annihilated. And then he looks over and he sees this 3 to 4 story tall structure. And the structure is sort of formed of lattice, and it's in the shape of basically an egg. And inside the structure are these gears, just a ton of gears that are interlocking with each other and moving around in this lattice structure. He's pretty familiar with engineering and he's just confused by it. And so he puts his hand inside the structure and he touches one of the gears and it makes him kind of feel nauseous. Somehow he knows to just pull it out. And when he does that, all of the gears just kind of reform back into place. Jim says, "What is this thing?" He just says it out loud, kind of to himself. And that's when he hears this voice say,
"This is the process of becoming. This is the future birthing into the now."
And Bruton says, "Where am I?" And the voice says,
"You're in the in-between. You're standing inside the eternity of a single moment."
And Bruton says, "That makes no sense whatsoever." And he hears the voice say, "Do you remember the body to which your spirit belongs?" And Bruton had no idea. He had no clue. No, he didn't remember. And the voice says,
"Then you see the truth in how the past is dust."
Bruton looks back at the giant egg and he realizes that these gears represent events in his future. Some of the gears are more sort of translucent, more ghost-like, and some of them are more solid. And the ones that are more solid are much more likely, events that are much more likely to happen. And so he starts feeling these gears, and as he's feeling them, he can tell that some of them make him feel kind of nauseous, and others are just fine. They don't make him feel like anything. So basically, he's able to feel directly the consequences of any decisions he might make in the future. Every time, like if he feels a nauseous gear, he could feel, okay, that decision made me feel terrible. And so he starts pulling out all of the gears that make him feel nauseous, all the ones that make him feel bad. Finally, he's taken out all of these gears and he's like, "I'm done." The spirit that he's talking to gives him a few parting words of wisdom. One of them is,
"All of the force you will ever need is found in the art of letting go."
and then it says,
"Always live life in celebration of the individual spirit, for no one and no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul."
and then it says,
"Pay more attention to your relationships and be gentle with everyone as I'm gentle with you."
So he's able to change his entire future during this near-death experience. And apparently the entire universe conspired so that he would have this near-death experience. Like it probably shut his engine off. That's why. But what was strange about this particular NDE is that I've never heard of somebody going to an in-between. And I mean, I'm sure that's happened. I mean, near-death experiences, there's no rule to how they happen. So it could have happened to someone else, but this is just the first time, and I haven't really heard of many since, or any since, where somebody goes to an in-between. But Jim isn't done talking with this spirit. So she tells him that him being there is the result of a prayer that he apparently had said. He doesn't even remember what this prayer was, but apparently he prayed to have help making different decisions in his future. And then the last thing that the spirit tells Jim Bruton before he returns to his body is,
"And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same as the one who flew into it."
and with that, I leave you to ponder. Thank you for checking out the Woo There It Is podcast.